Welcome back to What They Hide, Hidden Crimes in Plain Sight. Before we begin today's episode, just a quick reminder that you can find the podcast on all major platforms and you can follow the show across social media at What They Hide Pod. If you'd like to support the podcast directly, help improve production and keep independent episodes coming, you can also support the show through Buy Me a Coffee. The link is available in the episode description. And if you enjoy the podcast, make sure you're following or subscribed wherever you're listening. Leaving a rating or review really does help more people discover the show. Today's episode contains discussion of violence against women, abduction, sexual violence, murder, and themes some listeners may find distressing. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Alright, let's crack on with the show. Monday, the 28th of July, 1986. West London. At approximately 12:40 p.m, a 25-year-old estate agent left the office where she worked on Fulham Road. She was expected back within the hour. Before leaving, she noted the details of an appointment in her work diary. The client's name was written as Mr Kipper. The meeting was scheduled for a property on Shorrolds Road in Fulham. It appeared routine. Nothing about the appointment immediately stood out to her colleagues. Nothing suggested danger, no raised alarm, no hesitation. She walked out into the middle of a warm summer afternoon and disappeared into one of the busiest cities in the world. She was never seen again. In the decades that followed, investigators would pursue thousands of leads. Witnesses would emerge, suspects would be identified. One man in particular would become central to the investigation, a violent offender with a history of attacks against women. But despite one of the largest missing person inquiries in British history, no body was ever found. No one was ever charged, and the identity of Mr Kipper remains one of the most chilling unanswered questions in modern British criminal history. This is the disappearance of Suzy Lamplugh. In the summer of 1986, Fulham was changing. Located in southwest London, the district had once been associated primarily with working-class families and industrial employment. But by the mid-1980s, parts of the area were beginning to gentrify. Property prices were climbing, young professionals were moving in, estate agencies were thriving. The London housing market was active, competitive, and increasingly lucrative. Among the many estate agencies operating in the area was Sturgis & Sons, located at 654 Fulham Road. It was here that Suzy Lamplugh worked as a property negotiator. The role involved arranging and conducting property viewings, meeting prospective buyers, and spending large portions of the day moving between addresses, often alone. At the time, lone working safety procedures were limited. Estate agents routinely met unknown clients with little more than a name recorded in an appointment book. Mobile phones were uncommon. Offices relied heavily on trust, routine, and assumption. If an estate agent failed to return on time, it did not always immediately raise concern. For Suzy Lamplugh, much of this was simply normal working life. She had been born on the 3rd of May 1961 into a close and supportive family. Friends and relatives later described her as intelligent, warm, independent, and energetic. She'd attended boarding school before later studying and working in various jobs, eventually moving into estate agency work in London. By 1986, she was living in Fulham and building a professional life in the city. Those who knew her described someone sociable and capable, a young woman who enjoyed London life and maintained close relationships with family and friends. Nothing about the morning of Monday the 28th of July appeared unusual. At Sturgis and Sons, the working day progressed normally. Calls came in, appointments were arranged, properties were discussed with clients. At some point before midday, Suzy recorded a new appointment in the office diary. The entry was brief. Mr Kipper. The viewing was arranged for 12:45 p.m. at 37 Shorrolds Road. The name itself did not immediately attract suspicion, but later, investigators would spend years trying to determine whether Mr Kipper had ever existed at all. Shortly before leaving the office, Suzy spoke with colleagues about the viewing. Accounts vary slightly regarding the exact conversation, but multiple reports suggest she mentioned the client appeared wealthy or flash. One colleague later recalled Suzy describing the man as possibly being a scion type, a reference interpreted by some as meaning affluent, businesslike, or associated with the technology sector. The significance of the remark remains uncertain. At approximately 12:40 p.m, Suzy left the office. She was wearing a dark skirt, a blouse, jacket, and high-heeled shoes. She drove a white Ford Fiesta, registration B396NNO. The journey to Shorrolds Road was short. 37 Shorrolds Road was a residential property located only a few minutes away from the estate agency office. At around 1 p.m, witnesses reported seeing Suzy near the property in conversation with a man. The sighting would later become one of the most important moments in the entire investigation. Witness descriptions varied slightly, but the man was generally described as white, approximately 6 foot tall, aged in his 30s, dark hair, smartly dressed. One witness described him as handsome and charismatic. Another recalled seeing the pair walking together. These sightings are widely regarded as the last confirmed observations of Suzy Lamplugh alive. What happened next remains unknown. There is no confirmed witness account detailing where she went after the meeting, and there is no definitive forensic evidence identifying what occurred during the missing hours that followed. At first, nobody realised anything was wrong. In estate agency work, appointments sometimes run late. Clients change schedules. Negotiators travel between addresses throughout the day. But as the afternoon continued, concerns slowly began to grow. Suzy failed to return to the office. Colleagues attempted to contact her. As time passed, the situation became increasingly unusual. Eventually, her office contacted the police. By that stage, several crucial hours had already passed. Later that evening, Suzy's white Ford Fiesta was discovered approximately a mile away from the estate agency office. The vehicle had been parked on Stevenage Road near Putney Bridge. The position of the car immediately raised questions. Accounts differ slightly regarding specific details, but reports consistently state the vehicle appeared abandoned. The driver's door was unlocked. Some sources report that the driver's seat had been pushed unusually far back, suggesting someone taller than Suzy may have driven it. However, this point has remained disputed over the years and was never treated publicly as definitive evidence. Inside the vehicle, there were no immediate signs of a struggle, no obvious bloodstaining, no indication of forced violence, but Suzy herself was gone. For investigators, the discovery of the car transformed the case. This was no longer treated as a routine missing person inquiry. Something far more serious appeared to have happened, and across London, police began trying to answer a terrifyingly simple question. Who was Mr Kipper? By the evening of the 28th of July, concern had become alarm. Suzy Lamplugh had failed to return home. For family, friends and colleagues, the silence was deeply out of character. She had not contacted anyone. There had been no explanation for her disappearance, and now her car had been discovered abandoned several streets away from her scheduled appointment. The Metropolitan Police began an urgent investigation. Initially, officers worked under the assumption that Suzy might still be alive. Search teams were deployed across parts of southwest London. Parks, alleyways, empty properties, garages and waste ground were examined. Police divers searched waterways. Officers conducted house-to-house inquiries throughout Fulham and surrounding areas. Very quickly, investigators became focused on establishing one crucial sequence of events. What happened between Suzy leaving the office at approximately 12:40 and the discovery of her car later that evening? The timeline was frustratingly incomplete. Police confirmed that Suzy had attended, or at minimum arrived near the appointment at Shorrolds Road. Witnesses had seen her speaking with a man believed to be Mr Kipper. After that, the trail effectively disappeared. No verified bank activity, no confirmed telephone calls, no reliable sightings later in the day. For detectives, the lack of evidence was deeply concerning. In central London, during daylight hours, a young woman had seemingly vanished without trace. Within days, the case had become national news. Newspapers across Britain published Suzy's photograph. Television broadcasts carried details of the disappearance. The mystery surrounding Mr Kipper captured immediate public attention. The name itself seemed strange, memorable, almost theatrical. Investigators urgently appealed for anyone using that name, or anyone who recognised it, to contact police. No verified Mr Kipper ever came forward. The police inquiry expanded rapidly. Hundreds of officers were eventually assigned to the investigation. Thousands of statements were taken. Potential sightings flooded in from across London and beyond. Many turned out to be false. Others could never be verified. But among the most significant developments were witnesses, descriptions of the man seen with Suzy shortly before she disappeared. Using these accounts, the police produced photo-fit images. The man was generally described as well-spoken, neatly dressed, dark-haired and confident. Some witnesses believed he appeared affluent. Others described him as charming. One witness later recalled the man appearing calm and entirely at ease. Nothing about the interaction appeared overtly threatening, and that, investigators believed, may have been crucial. If Suzy sensed danger immediately, witnesses might have noticed distress. Instead, the encounter appeared ordinary, controlled, routine. The photo fits were released publicly. Newspapers printed them repeatedly. Television programmes appealed directly to viewers for information. Across Britain, people studied the face of the unidentified man, and fear began spreading far beyond Fulham. To understand the public reaction to Suzy Lamplug's disappearance, it's important to understand Britain in the mid-1980s. Violent crime against women was receiving increasing national attention. The murder of Joanna Yeats was still decades away, but public consciousness had already been shaped by cases involving predators targeting women in public spaces. The crimes of Peter Sutcliffe, during the late 1970s had profoundly altered perceptions of personal safety. Women were routinely advised not to walk alone, not to hitchhike, not to trust strangers, and yet Suzy's disappearance appeared different. She had not vanished at night. She had not disappeared while isolated. She had vanished while carrying out ordinary professional work in broad daylight. The implications were deeply unsettling, especially for women working alone. Estate agents, surveyors, social workers, and nurses all recognised the vulnerability immediately. At the time, there were few formal safety procedures for lone workers. Many agencies didn't require detailed client verification before appointments. Staff often entered empty properties alone with unknown individuals. Minimal records were kept. No mobile tracking existed. No instant communication. In practical terms, someone could arrange a viewing under a false name and disappear again within minutes. That reality now appeared terrifyingly plausible. As public attention intensified, detectives explored multiple possibilities. One theory suggested Suzy may have been abducted by a stranger using the false identity of Mr Kipper. Another considered whether the offender had specifically targeted estate agents. Police examined previous incidents involving suspicious property viewings and attacks on women in London. They also investigated whether Suzy herself had been deliberately selected. There was, however, no evidence she knew the man personally. Friends, family and colleagues struggled to identify anyone matching the witness descriptions. Detectives also explored the possibility that Mr Kipper had used the appointment as a lure. If true, it suggested planning. The offender would have known how estate agencies operated, understood negotiators often worked alone, and anticipated that an appointment during working hours would appear legitimate. This possibility deeply concerned investigators. It implied organisation and confidence rather than impulsive violence. As the inquiry expanded, criticism slowly emerged regarding aspects of the investigation. Some issues reflected the limitations of policing technology in 1986. Others appeared more serious. One major challenge involved the delay before the disappearance was recognised as potentially criminal. Several hours had passed before police fully appreciated the severity of the situation. By then, witnesses had dispersed, memories had begun fading, and possible forensic opportunities may already have been lost. Investigators also faced difficulties managing the enormous volume of incoming information. Thousands of leads poured into the incident room. Not all were followed effectively. Some lines of inquiry became delayed. Others were abandoned and later revisited. In later years, criticism would focus particularly on how certain suspects were assessed and whether opportunities to identify violent offenders had been missed. But in the early stages, detectives remained under extraordinary pressure. Public anxiety was escalating, media scrutiny was intense, and there was still no clear evidence explaining what had happened to Suzy Lamplugh. As weeks turned into months, police repeatedly returned to the same central question. Could Suzy's final movements be reconstructed with greater precision? Investigators carefully mapped her route from the estate agency, witnessed sightings, timings between appointments, and the location of her abandoned vehicle. Every minute mattered. Police believed the offender had likely acted quickly. The distance between Shorrells Road and Stevenage Road was relatively short. If Suzy had been abducted shortly after meeting Mr Kipper, events may have unfolded within an extremely narrow time frame. One unresolved question involved whether the offender had transferred Suzy into another vehicle. Another possibility was that her own car had been moved after the abduction. Investigators examined whether multiple offenders could have been involved, though no conclusive evidence supported the theory publicly. And despite extensive searches, no forensic breakthrough emerged. No confirmed murder scene was ever identified. No body was found. No definitive physical evidence publicly linked a suspect to the disappearance. The case was becoming one of absence, an investigation built around missing pieces. As months passed, police examined numerous individuals. Some were violent offenders already known to authorities. Others were members of the public whose behaviour attracted suspicion. Many were eliminated. Some remained ambiguously connected to the case for years. Among those who drew investigative attention was a convicted offender named John Cannan. At the time of Suzy's disappearance, Cannan was already known for violent criminal behaviour, but initially, investigators did not fully appreciate how significant his name might eventually become. That would change later, and when it did, detectives would begin examining the disturbing possibility that Suzy Lamplugh had encountered a serial predator operating in plain sight. By the late 1980s, detectives investigating the disappearance of Suzy Lamplugh had examined hundreds of potential suspects. Some had criminal histories, some had been identified through witness appeals. Others emerged through anonymous tip-offs or intelligence reports. But over time, one name repeatedly returned to the attention of investigators: John Cannan. For many officers involved in the case, Cannan eventually became more than simply a person of interest. He became the man they believed was responsible for Suzy Lamplug's disappearance. John Cannan was born in 1954. Accounts of his early life describe instability, violence and behavioural problems from a relatively young age. As he grew older, his criminal offending escalated steadily. By adulthood, Cannan had already developed a significant record involving dishonesty, theft, violence and sexual offending. Women repeatedly appeared at the centre of his crimes. Control, manipulation, aggression. These patterns would become increasingly important to investigators examining Suzy Lamplug's disappearance years later. Throughout the 70s and 80s, Cannan accumulated convictions for increasingly serious offences. Among the most significant were violent attacks against women. In one incident, he abducted and sexually assaulted a woman after forcing her into a vehicle. In another, he carried out offences involving threats and intimidation. Police later concluded that Cannan demonstrated many behavioural traits associated with predatory offenders: superficial charm, confidence with strangers, manipulation, impulsive violence, and a willingness to rapidly escalate control over victims. Importantly, investigators also noticed his apparent ability to appear socially functional when required. Witnesses frequently described him as articulate and personable. That detail stood out, because witnesses who saw Suzy speaking with Mr Kipper had also described a man who appeared confident, calm and respectable. Not someone visibly threatening, not someone who immediately attracted suspicion. In 1985, approximately 1 year before Suzy disappeared, Cannan was released from prison. The decision would later attract enormous criticism. Reports from prison staff had allegedly described him as manipulative and dangerous. One prison officer reportedly referred to him as a psychopath. Yet despite serious concerns surrounding his behaviour, he was freed. Following his release, Cannan spent time in London and the Bristol area. He worked intermittently. He socialised in pubs and clubs, and according to later police theories, he continued targeting women. Detectives examining the Lamplugh investigation became increasingly interested in whether Cannan had been operating in West London during the summer of 1986, particularly in and around Fulham, the area where Suzy vanished. In 1987, just over a year after Suzy Lamplugh disappeared, another violent crime shocked investigators. A 29-year-old newlywed named Shirley Banks, often referred to in reporting by a married name, Shirley Banks Honeyford, disappeared after working at a flower shop in Bristol. Her body was later discovered in woodland. She had been sexually assaulted and murdered. The investigation quickly focused on John Cannan. He was arrested, charged, and ultimately convicted of her murder. During the inquiry, police uncovered disturbing similarities between the Honeyford case and the disappearance of Suzy Lamplugh. Both victims were young professional women. Both disappeared suddenly during ordinary daytime routines. Both cases involved indications of an offender comfortable approaching women in public, and in both investigations, Cannan's behaviour drew significant attention. After his conviction of murder, investigators began re-examining Cannan's possible involvement in other unsolved crimes, including Suzy Lamplugh. Over time, detectives assembled a series of circumstantial links between Cannan and the Lamplugh investigation. None individually proved guilt. Collectively, however, investigators believed they formed a compelling picture. One important factor involved geography. Evidence suggested Cannan had familiarity with parts of West London during the relevant period. He also reportedly used aliases and demonstrated confidence approaching strangers. Police further examined whether Cannan could have presented himself in a manner consistent with witness descriptions of Mr Kipper. Several witnesses had described a well-dressed man, socially confident, attractive or charismatic, physically larger than Suzy. Descriptions investigators believed broadly align with Cannan's appearance at the time. Another detail drew particular attention. Cannan had previously demonstrated a pattern of controlling women through sudden violence and intimidation after initially appearing non-threatening. To detectives, this behavioural pattern appeared significant, because witnesses observing Suzy and the unidentified man saw nothing visibly alarming. If the offender was Cannan, police believed he may have relied on charm and normality during the initial encounter. As years passed, further claims emerged. Some prisoners alleged that Cannan had spoken about killing Suzy Lamplugh. Others claimed he hinted at knowledge only the offender would possess. Several reports suggested Cannan made indirect admissions while in custody. However, these accounts created serious evidential problems. Prison testimony is notoriously unreliable. Inmates may exaggerate, seek attention, pursue reduced sentences, or fabricate stories entirely. Police therefore treated many claims cautiously. Nevertheless, some investigators believed the statements added weight to existing suspicions, particularly because certain alleged remarks appeared unusually specific. At various points, searches were conducted based on intelligence connected to Cannan. Areas of land were examined, potential burial sites investigated, but despite extensive efforts, no confirmed trace of Suzy Lamplugh was ever recovered. Without forensic evidence or a body, prosecutors faced enormous difficulties. In 2002, the Metropolitan Police publicly identified John Cannan as the prime suspect in the disappearance of Suzy Lamplugh. By then, the investigation had lasted 16 years. For many observers, the announcement appeared significant. Police rarely identify a prime suspect publicly without considerable confidence. Investigators stated that evidence gathered over the years strongly indicated Cannan's involvement. Yet crucially, they also acknowledged the evidential threshold required for prosecution had not been met. The case against Cannan remained largely circumstantial. There was no body, no murder scene, no DNA evidence publicly linking him to Suzy, and no eyewitnesses able to definitively identify him as Mr Kipper. While police suspicion was clear, suspicion alone could not secure conviction, and British prosecutors must prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt. One of the defining frustrations of the Lamplugh investigation is the gap between suspicion and proof. Many officers became convinced Cannan was responsible, but criminal investigations are not resolved by belief, they're resolved through evidence, and in this case, critical evidence was missing from the beginning. The passage of time compounded the problem. Witness memories faded, potential forensic opportunities disappeared, records were lost, locations changed, and without Suzy's body, investigators could not establish a definitive cause of death, the location of the killing, or the forensic chain that might conclusively connect an offender to the crime. This absence shaped the entire case. The investigation increasingly became an attempt to prove an invisible event. John Cannan consistently denied involvement in Suzy Lamplug's disappearance. He was interviewed repeatedly by police. Searches connected to intelligence about him continued for years, but no prosecution ever followed. And despite decades of investigation, the question that first emerged in the summer of 1986 remained unanswered. Who was Mr Kipper? As the years passed, the disappearance of Suzy Lamplugh gradually transformed from an active missing person inquiry into one of Britain's most enduring cold cases. But the investigation never truly stopped. New information continued to emerge, fresh searches were authorised, and detectives repeatedly returned to evidence gathered during the summer of 1986. Throughout the 90s and early 2000s, the Metropolitan Police conducted periodic reviews of the case. Advances in forensic science offered cautious hope. Cold case investigators re-examined witness statements, timelines, photographs, and physical exhibits retained from the original inquiry. Areas connected to intelligence reports were searched again. Excavation teams examined stretches of land across multiple countries, woodland, garages, industrial sites, remote fields. Each new search reignited public attention, and each time the outcome was the same. Nothing conclusively linked to Suzy Lamplugh was found. One persistent challenge involved the sheer scale of possible disposal locations. If Suzy had been abducted and murdered shortly after meeting Mr Kipper, investigators believed her body could have been transported far beyond West London within hours. Over time, countless theories emerged regarding potential burial sites. Many were investigated, none produced definitive answers. Few British missing person cases have maintained public attention as persistently as the disappearance of Suzy Lamplugh. Part of that fascination stemmed from the apparent simplicity of the mystery. A woman leaves work for an appointment, she vanishes, a false name remains behind in a diary, and then nothing. No confirmed crime scene, no witnesses to the violence, no body, no resolution. The unanswered nature of the case allowed it to become embedded within British public consciousness. Television documentaries revisited the investigation repeatedly. Newspaper retrospectives appeared almost every anniversary. Programs such as Crime Watch reconstructed Suzy's final movements for millions of viewers. Each reconstruction renewed public interest, and each new generation encountered the same disturbing question. Could someone truly disappear in broad daylight without a trace? The mystery surrounding Mr Kipper also played a significant role in the case's longevity. The name itself became culturally iconic, recognisable even to people unfamiliar with the full investigation. Over time, Mr Kipper came to represent something larger than a single unidentified suspect. It represented the terrifying possibility that ordinary routines can conceal extraordinary danger. For Suzy Lamplug's family, The absence of answers created a unique form of suffering. Unlike confirmed homicide cases, there was no funeral, no recovery, no certainty, only silence and waiting. In 1993, 7 years after Suzy disappeared, she was legally declared dead. The declaration reflected what investigators and family members had already come to accept privately. Despite exhaustive inquiries, there was no realistic evidence suggesting Suzy remained alive. Even so, the legal process carried enormous emotional weight, because formally declaring a missing person dead does not end uncertainty. It simply acknowledges the probability that hope has become impossible to sustain. Throughout the investigation, Suzy's family remained central to efforts to keep the case alive publicly. They gave interviews, participated in appeals, supported searches, and continued pressing for information long after media attention might ordinarily have faded. Relatives consistently described the emotional toll of existing in permanent uncertainty. The inability to recover a body meant there was no clear ending, no final moment of closure, only unanswered questions repeated year after year. The family also faced the challenge experienced by many relatives of long-term missing persons, life continuing publicly while emotionally remaining suspended in the moment of disappearance. Birthdays passed, anniversaries passed, entire decades passed, yet the central reality remained unchanged. Suzy left for an appointment in July 1986 and never came home. Out of that tragedy emerged one of the most significant personal safety organisations in Britain. In 1986, the Suzy Lamplugh Trust was established. The organisation focused on personal safety education, lone worker protection, stalking awareness, and violence prevention. Its creation reflected a growing recognition that Suzy's disappearance exposed serious vulnerabilities in everyday working practices, especially for women working alone. Over time, the Trust became highly influential in shaping workplace safety guidance across Britain. Training programs encouraged employers to verify client identities, maintain detailed appointment records, establish staff check-in procedures, and improve risk awareness for lone workers. Many of these practices are now routine, but in 1986 they were far less common. In this sense, Suzy Lamplugh's disappearance permanently altered how organisations approach personal safety, particularly in professions requiring employees to meet strangers alone. Over the decades, investigators explored numerous possible suspects connected to the disappearance of Suzy Lamplugh. Some theories emerged privately within the investigation, others developed publicly through media speculation and renewed attention surrounding unrelated criminal cases. Most were eventually discounted. But one particular line of inquiry briefly reignited national interest in the case during 2008. That year, Steve Wright, who we covered in episode 3, the Suffolk Strangler case, was convicted of murdering 5 women in Ipswich. As details of Wright's background became public, investigators identified a disturbing coincidence. Years earlier, both Wright and Suzy Lamplugh had worked aboard the luxury ocean liner QE2. Suzy had worked as a beautician on the ship during the early 1980s. Wright had worked there as a steward. Reports later suggested the pair may have known each other casually while on board. The revelation immediately attracted media attention. Given Wright's history of violence against women, police examined whether any incredible link existed between him and Suzy's disappearance. Suzy's father later confirmed that detectives had discussed Wright with the family during the inquiry. For a brief period, public speculation intensified. The idea that one of Britain's most notorious serial killers may have crossed paths with Suzy before her disappearance appeared deeply unsettling. However, investigators ultimately found no evidence directly connecting Wright to the case. Police later examined records relating to Wright's employment aboard the QE2 and concluded he was likely working on the vessel at the time Suzy disappeared in 1986. Senior investigators reportedly described the theory as speculative rather than evidential, and over time, attention returned once again to the man police had long regarded as the prime suspect, John Cannan. Even so, the existence of the Wright inquiry demonstrated something important about the Lamplugh investigation. After decades without resolution, detectives remained willing to revisit almost any credible possibility, because without definitive evidence, certainty remained impossible. Despite decades of investigation, major questions remain unsolved. Was Mr Kipper genuinely connected to John Cannan? Or was the similarity coincidental? Did Suzy enter another vehicle willingly? Was she specifically targeted or selected opportunistically? Did the offender act alone? And perhaps most hauntingly of all, where is Suzy Lamplugh? Some investigators believed the case was effectively solved in all but legal terms. Others remained more cautious. Without definitive forensic evidence, uncertainty continues to surround critical aspects of the investigation. And while police publicly identified John Cannan as the prime suspect, important evidential gaps were never closed. In November 2024, Cannan died in prison. With his death, hopes of any future confession effectively disappeared. If he was responsible, investigators may never know precisely what happened after Suzy left Shorrolds Road that afternoon. And if he was not responsible, then one of Britain's most notorious missing persons cases may still lack a confirmed offender entirely. There are cases remembered because of brutality, cases remembered because of forensic breakthroughs, cases remembered because of courtroom drama. But the disappearance of Suzy Lamplugh lingers for a different reason, because of how ordinary it appeared. No one expects danger during a routine work appointment in the middle of the day. No one expects a short journey across West London to become the final known movement of a human life. And yet, somewhere between an estate agency office and a house viewing, Suzy Lamplugh vanished. For nearly 4 decades, investigators searched for evidence capable of explaining what happened in those missing hours. But the case remains defined not by what was discovered, but by what never was. No body, no certainty, no proven account of the final moments. Only fragments, a diary entry, a witness sighting, an abandoned white Ford Fiesta, and a name written neatly into an appointment book on a summer afternoon in 1986. Mr Kipper. If you have been affected by any of the issues discussed in this episode, support is available through organisations including the Suzy Lamplugh Trust. This has been What They Hide, hidden crimes in plain sight.